I would like to welcome you all and thank you so much for making it today. We know that the weather may not seem to be with us, but I think that the most important thing is to be here with Guatemala and the people of Guatemala who today suffer a terrible earthquake in the northwestern highlands. We hear today, the earthquake was about, I think, 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
No, 10:30.
Oh, it was in the morning. It was in the morning. We hear that about, in San Marcos, about 25 people killed, but hundreds disappeared. The rural areas in Guatemala are the most vulnerable in terms of their geography, but also because that's where the Mayan and indigenous people who make up 80% of the population live in very precarious situations and living conditions. So let me then begin by thanking also our co-sponsors for today. And I would like to thank my department and the chair of my department, Professor Evan Mandery, in providing his relentless support to my work and to the work of the Historical Memory Project. Our co-sponsors are also the Gender Studies Program, the Sociology Department, and here we have, I will acknowledge Professor Ratherton, I thought he was around, maybe, and Professor Jane Mooney, who's also our relentless and fearless supporter, and the MA program in International Crime and Justice, the BA program in International Criminal Justice as well. And we have today a group from City College, and we're very thankful for them also to be here. I will very briefly tell you a little bit about today's program, how we're going to go about discussing what brings us together today. Before I forget, we also want to thank Daniel Velasquez, who designed the flyer for our event. And I will say this at the end of today, but I also want to thank our awesome assistant director, Lilia Shestevalova, who has coordinated and organized to the last detail today's event, and also to Edson Gonzalez, who is here and who has just joined us. So I will tell you how we're going to go through these couple of hours. I will tell you a little bit about the Historical Memory Project, what is it, where is it, the idea about behind the project of having a project that focuses on collective memory of atrocities that happened in Latin America. We're hoping to have the opportunity to show you a brief clip of a film, When the Mountains Tremble, by the director is Pamela Yates. And this is a film that was done in 1982. It's a classic of the Guatemalan War scholarship. And I think that Bea Gallardo, I don't know if she's here, she's an associate of Pamela Yates, who did the film. And maybe she's not here yet, we will ask Bea during the Q&A half an hour to talk a little bit about the latest work that they have done on Guatemala in terms of their film that they do. We're going to have very briefly now a Skype conversation message that we want Virginia Ashpoop from Pop Noch. Pop Noch is an organization in Guatemala City that coordinates and works with women in the rural areas promoting women's rights. And Virginia is in Guatemala City, and we're going to Skype, have a phone conversation with her so she can tell us very briefly about what's going on with women in Guatemala and all the, it's not just the violence that they are subjected to, but a message. We want to hear from Virginia, who is an educator. She has a master. She's a Maya Quiche. Guatemala has 22 Maya groups, linguistic groups. She belongs to one of the largest, which is the Quiche. And she has a master in human rights in Guatemala. And she has been working with women, and particularly indigenous women, training, promoting human rights in rural areas. And Virginia, her approach to, on behalf of women, is to break the silence over atrocities that happened to women during the genocide, but that they have a lingering effect, and that those effects continue until today. So that if you want to think about genocide as the crime, someone has said that it's the crime of the crimes, that targets particular groups of people, okay? Broadly defined. We're not going to go into any discussion of the legal aspects of genocide today, but so that we are in a common platform about what is that we understand by genocide. And so Virginia promotes this notion of breaking the silence, okay? And that's what we're doing today, breaking the silence. And the invitation of the Historical Memory Project is for you to become, to bear witness with us to genocide of the Mayas in Guatemala. And so that when you leave today, you can tell others what you heard and what you saw today. So in that way, everyone becomes a multiplier, has a multiplying effect that everyone tells everyone else. And therefore, we all bear witness to violence. So we're going to have translations, and that's the foreign language department, and that's Anita. And I will present very briefly now our panelists, so that you know that I will be talking to Virginia, and Aida will be translating. So just bear with us. It's going to be a little slow motion before we go back to Virginia, English, Spanish, back. Okay, so we have an opportunity to watch the clip from The Mountains Tremble. The sound is on, so we're on. But Aida would like to give a brief translation in Spanish for the people who are watching us in Guatemala.
Buenas tardes. Buenas tardes, bienvenidos a todos. Mi nombre es Marcia Esparcia y soy profesora en el Departamento de Justicia Penal en la Universidad de John Jay, aquí en Nueva York. Bienvenidos a todos y gracias por venir. Es muy importante su presencia aquí porque queremos compartir con ustedes algo muy importante sobre Guatemala, un país que hoy en concreto ha sufrido un tremendo terremoto. En San Marcos se comenta que 25 personas han fallecido y cientos están desaparecidas. Y es muy importante hablar de estas zonas porque son zonas rurales muy vulnerables, no solo geográficamente, sino porque son las zonas donde vive la gran mayoría de la población maya e indígena. Un 80% de la población en estas zonas es maya o indígena y viven en situaciones muy precarias. Me gustaría agradecer a todos nuestros co-sponsors, mi departamento, incluido el director de mi departamento, por su incansable apoyo a mí y a mi proyecto, y a nuestro proyecto de memoria histórica, al Departamento de Estudios de Género, de Sociología, los programas de maestría de Justicia Penal Internacional y el programa de licenciatura de Justicia Penal Internacional, y al grupo que tenemos aquí presente de City College. También a Daniel Velázquez por diseñar nuestro flyer, a nuestra directora asistente Sesto Palova, al señor González y demás. Les quiero explicar brevemente cómo vamos a desarrollar la tarde de hoy. Vamos a hacer una breve presentación sobre el proyecto de memoria histórica, cuál es la idea que hay detrás de él, que es enfocarnos en un proyecto de memoria colectiva de las atrocidades que se han sufrido en Latinoamérica. Después proyectaremos un vídeo, When the Mountains Tremble, cuando tiemblan las montañas, de Pamela Yates, del 82. Bea Gallardo es asociada suya y quizás esté aquí más tarde para responder a nuestras preguntas. Después tendremos una sesión por Skype con Virginia Ashbrook, de la organización guatemalteca POCNOG, que trabaja con mujeres en áreas rurales y lucha por los derechos de estas mujeres. Es una mujer maya quiché, de uno de los 22 grupos lingüísticos mayas que hay en Guatemala, y que se dedica a formar y a promover la importancia de los derechos humanos en áreas rurales y especialmente con las mujeres. Su principal mensaje es romper el silencio sobre las atrocidades que tienen un efecto permanente todavía en el presente, y eso es a lo que les invitamos a hacer esta tarde con nosotros, a romper ese silencio, a ser testigos del genocidio de los mayas en Guatemala y a ser un elemento más en la cadena de jugadores de testigos de esta situación, para que podamos transmitir unos a otros el mensaje, llegue a la comunidad.
So we're going to watch just 1 minute of the film When the Mountains Tremble, so that you can have an idea of the context of the war and what was happening during the 36-year war. And I will give you after that a little bit, a few more minutes of detail of the context before we go to present our distinguished panelists. The war in Guatemala, it was, as I said, 36-year war. In 1954, the democratically elected government was overthrown by the United States CIA in complicity with the Guatemalan part of the armed forces. And since then, since 1954, counterinsurgency campaigns and scorched earth campaigns, particularly during the genocide 81 to 1983, that took place, that the government, the different governments in Guatemala went after the organized group of Mayan who were demanding social change. So let me just say that Guatemala is the largest of all Central American countries. It has, as I said, 80%, the majority of the population is Maya, indigenous, and live in appalling poverty. About 80% of the population, of the indigenous population, live in extreme poverty, and by that I mean without access to healthcare, without access to education, high mortality rates, high infant mortality rates, and I could, give you numbers about the levels of poverty on Guatemala, but it's difficult to really illustrate this kind of poverty that I call coercive poverty, that coerces people into playing certain roles. And but during the Q&A, I can expand a little bit more on a couple of examples that I usually use in terms to illustrate what it means, this poverty in Guatemala. So the film that you're going to see are scenes during the genocide, 81 to 83. During those years, the governments of Lucas Garcia and Efraín Ríos Montt went after the organized groups of the Mayans who had, after many years of organizing, finally coming together and challenging the government and protesting for better land, not just more land, but better land, land tenure. The property of land is one of the main issues in Guatemala. Only a few people, a teeny group of people owns most of the good land. It's not just about the land, it's the good land, because it doesn't matter if you have land if you cannot use it. So most Mayans live in tiny many plots of land that they can barely survive in a subsistence economy, growing maize, corn, and beans. That's what they eat. That's the caloric, food that they eat. So when the mountains tremble, is about this period where the violence was at the highest.
كون دقيقة غير دقيقة تفشح كانون كان بيت كان كاتشخصي واقش كي كان صح كانوا واقش كي جعزاك بس كان صح كانوا شنو كان كات كانوا قبات شنشل كي كان صح بس لا كي كمان تقيري خرص كان دقيقة كان قبات كي مك دقيقة كانوا كريستيانو بس كي كات كانوا باتشنا
¿Podrían levantar la mano las compañeras a que han sido violadas por el ejército? O sea, la compañera fue una de las... después, si Chijarín, ¿qué por? Chijarín, ¿qué por después? Guerrillas,
So the clip shows a group of the rebels that are fighting the government. The rebels are drawn as part of the villages in rural areas, and at some point they go into this village to talk to the community. Communities in Guatemala are rural settlements spread out in remote and distant areas of the main roads. Sometimes it takes 2, 3, 4, 5 hours trekking to reach one of the, some of these villages. So the rebels go into one village and they ask the women, who has been raped in this village? And the women raise their hands to say, I was raped, or my daughter was raped. And then the rebels ask them, who did this to you? And the women said, the army, the government army. But at that point, the government, through its war propaganda campaigns, was saying that it were the ones doing the crimes were the rebels. Okay, so that was one of the strategies that was used during the war, whereby the government would blame the rebels for the atrocities, but it was the other way around. And I will, after our brief talk with Virginia, I will give you some of the main findings of the Truth Commission that went into the country after the war was over in 1996, and tell you a little bit about those findings. And I'm speaking, 1,000 miles a minute, but these are all details about the war and, the Guatemalans, maybe you want just a brief summary.
El vídeo se desarrolla en el contexto del genocidio en su momento más álgido entre los años 1981 y 1983, que tuvo lugar durante los 36 años en los que estuvo Guatemala sumida en una guerra. En este vídeo se muestra un grupo de rebeldes de las comunidades rurales que están luchando en contra del gobierno, y en un momento determinado se acercan a estas comunidades, que son asentamientos en zonas rurales normalmente muy alejadas de las carreteras, y preguntan a un grupo de mujeres quién había sido violada, y unas cuantas alzan la mano y les preguntan quién había hecho eso, y les responden que el ejército gubernamental. Por otro lado, el gobierno, dentro de su propaganda de la guerra, es quien culpa en un momento determinado a los rebeldes de cometer todas estas atrocidades, pero en realidad es al contrario, fue una estrategia de ellos. Y en la sesión que tendremos después con Virginia hablaremos un poco de las comisiones de la verdad que a partir del 96 empezaron a destapar estas cuestiones.
So, while we wait for Virginia to get to have her on Skype, let me just very briefly then tell you about the Historical Memory Project. The project was born in 2002. I created the Historical Memory Project to bring awareness about state violence and genocide in Latin America during war years particularly. And since then, since 2002, we have had a series of at least one conference with 1992 Peace Nobel Prize, Rigoberta Menchú, and the Spanish judge, Baltasar Garzón, who were with us during this first conference that was in 2002. Since then, we have had events on Haiti. We had events on disarmament on Haiti. We had events about Chile, about the Mapuches, the indigenous peoples in Chile. And also we use a comparative lens. So we also had a couple of events on South Africa, on the end of the apartheid in South Africa. And we are hoping to have very soon a multimedia, hyper-interactive website where we will have all our material, which includes photographs of the genocide in Guatemala, of the exhumations. We have 10 photographs by Jonathan Moller, who's actually the photograph that we use in this flyer is by Jonathan Moller. And we have all kind of memory craft, as I call it, or memory traces. These are letters, these are, again, photographs, human rights transcripts, testimonies, anything that we can get from Chile, Argentina, Guatemala, Peru, Uruguay, Brazil, Mexico, that we can provide evidence and use as a resource, as a teaching resource for the future generations that we don't forget what happened. And we continue, again, with this idea of bearing witness to genocide and atrocities. In 1996, the United Nations ended the war in Guatemala. There was a peace agreement that was signed. There were about 13 peace agreements signed. One of those peace agreements established a truth commission. A truth commission are these ad hoc commissions of inquiry that goes into these countries such as Guatemala and investigate the past. I was part of this truth commission, and I took hundreds of testimonies in the rural areas. And I interviewed the victims of genocide. Some of the main findings of this truth commission is that about 200,000 people were killed, about 50,000 people disappeared, thousands were tortured and raped, and people were often thrown in unmarked graves. Yeah. In 83% of the cases, the victims were Mayans, and in 93% of the cases, the state committed the violence, not the rebels. The rebels were found by the United Nations Truth Commission responsible for 3% of all the human rights crimes and crimes against humanity. And this is very important, please, to dispel all kind of confusions usually that the rebels are the bad guys, and we tend to break the world into the good people and the bad people. Well, it's a little bit more complex than that, but so that you have that in mind, that again, 93% of all the human rights crimes were committed by the state. The commission found that from 1981 to 1983, the Guatemalan army identified organized peasants as the internal enemy of the country and committed genocide against 4 Mayan groups. So the war ends formally, officially, at least on paper. It ends in 1996, on December 29, 1996, and what we're going to be discussing today are the lingering effects of this war, so as to say that the peace agreements cannot end the impact and repercussion of 36 years of war. Only because you signed the peace agreements, it doesn't mean that the effects of the war are going to end. And we can talk about some of these legacies in terms of the kind of weapons and the proliferation of weapons in Guatemala. And today, what brings us today is to speak about the legacies of the war and the sexual violence against women. And do we have her? Yes? Okay, so I know I'm keeping the presentation of our awesome panelists to the end, but it's because now we have Virginia on Skype.
Buenas tardes.
Hola, sí, con Virginia, estamos acá del proyecto de memoria.
Claro, ahorita le comunico.
Gracias.
Buenas tardes, Lidia.
Sí, Virginia, ¿cómo estás?
Bien, gracias.
Virginia querida, acá te estamos saludando del proyecto de memoria histórica desde Nueva York, del colegio de John Jay, y te mandamos un abrazo muy grande. Hoy día sabemos del terremoto y te queremos abrazar a ti y a Popno y a la gente de Guatemala. Acá hay una traductora que va a traducir unas poquitas palabras, entonces si esperas un minuto y luego te damos la palabra a ti, ¿te parece?
Está bien.
Gracias, Virginia.
Bueno.
Hello, Virginia. How are you? We're saying hello here from John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York. We're calling you from the Historical Memory Project. We wanted to send you our best regards. We know that you've been through an earthquake today, so we want to send you and the whole people of Guatemala our best regards. There's a translator here who is going to help us today.
Virginia, tenemos unos pocos minutitos, pero queremos que les des un mensaje a los invitados que tenemos acá, porque estamos hablando sobre la violencia en contra de la mujer y la violencia sexual durante la guerra. Si nos puedes, por favor, dar un mensaje, unos pocos minutos para nuestra audiencia acá en Nueva York.
Muchas gracias, Marcia. Un saludo muy cordial a toda la audiencia. Y también yo creo que debo compartir lo que pasó esta mañana en Guatemala sobre el temblor. De alguna u otra manera la tierra está presentando sus facturas ante la humanidad. Esperamos que estemos conscientes sobre eso y también hacer nuevas propuestas frente a esta situación del sufrimiento, del dolor de la madre tierra. Bueno, en esta oportunidad yo elegí la violencia sexual durante la guerra. Es un tema de la que no se habla nada. Es un tema que quedó en el silencio. Entonces, por eso he elegido para darle a conocer al mundo cómo fue la guerra en Guatemala. Yo diría que la violencia sexual en todos los conflictos armados es uno de los silencios más grandes de la historia de las mujeres. Ha sido una práctica común y masiva en todas las guerras y en todos los genocidios para someter a pueblos y bandos enemigos a través del cuerpo de la mujer es que tienen esa lucha. Otra cosa también que podría decir al respecto, el pasado no está desvinculado del presente. La historia de las mujeres mayas de Guatemala confirman que el fenómeno del silencio histórico de las mujeres son signos de violencia sexual que presentan ahora los cuerpos mutilados.
Virginia, querida,
nombrar la violencia.
Dame un minuto para que te traduzca.
Está bien.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone in New York for having invited me to this talk this evening. I would like to share with you that the earthquake we had today is part of Mother Nature telling us how she's suffering for everything humanity is doing. I chose this
topic of sexual violence and war because it is a silence topic. Everyone knows that sexual violence is one of the greatest silence topics in history. It is a common practice in all wars, in all genocides. It is a way for the powerful to create submission for other groups through the body of women. And it is and I wanted you to know that the past is still connected to the present. The history of Mayan women is confirming that this silence is still present today. There are signs of sex violence in the bodies of these women, in mutilated bodies.
Sí, Virginia, puedes continuar, por favor, un minutito.
Muy bien, las huellas de la guerra han dejado heridas. La violación sexual marca la identidad de las mujeres, marca su pensamiento, su cosmovisión, pone en relieve la ruptura interna de su ser. Por eso para nosotros, nombrar la violación sexual transforma profundamente nuestro ser. Vemos al transgresor frente a las numerosas estrategias de silencio que nos imponen, pues lo vemos más por la doctrina del dominador, del opresor, del explotador. En este caso, en la guerra de Guatemala, el ejército utiliza la violación sexual como arma de fuerza, porque culturalmente se conoce que el impacto humillante que causa, el hecho desmoralizador que tiene la misma sobre lo que es cada grupo, cada pueblo, cada sociedad. Entonces, el cuerpo de las mujeres, su capacidad reproductiva, se utiliza a menudo como campo de batalla simbólica. Los agresores bien saben que nunca habrá castigo para ellos, porque se trata de la intimidad de la mujer. Y esta es la tragedia más grande que viven las mujeres.
Gracias.
Y ante esto también, además, que vemos como estrategia, a la par de esto, hay toda una ideología como la discriminación. Esto le dice a cada mujer que nos vemos excluidas, que nos vemos marginadas. Y por eso la violación sexual, pues no tiene tanto interés en que se trate, en que se resuelve, sino por el contrario, yo lo veo también la violación sexual desde los 3 momentos de los holocaustos que ha vivido el pueblo maya. La mujer que fue violada en la época de la invasión, y la veo como la violación sexual prolongada, que hasta actualmente se mantiene esa idea de qué importa violar a las mujeres mayas. Y contamos con el segundo holocausto, que sería cuando se impone la siembra del café. Las mujeres tenían que desempeñarse como la mano de obra, y ahí en las fincas la mujer también sufre la violación sexual. Pero esto ya va más con una intención mucho más fuerte, como colonialistas, que es el exterminio masivo de un pueblo. Y hoy, pues, en los 36 años de guerra, desde toda esta experiencia que ha venido, hay un plan direccional intelectual. Y ese plan direccional donde hay mandos, donde hay capacitaciones, donde la autorización y el poder juegan un papel importante, hay órdenes para lo que tienen que llevarse la ejecución. Entonces,
Virginia,
esta planificación.
Sí, le vamos a dar la palabra entonces a la traductora,
Sí.
y te vamos a tener que dejar porque tenemos entonces ahorita que darle también la...
¿Ya, Marcia?
Sí. Entonces te saludamos, Virginia, inmensamente, te queremos mucho.
Sí, Marcia, ¿no escucho?
Sí, ¿no me escuchas?
No, ahorita sí.
Sí, te abrazamos mucho. Vamos a hacer la traducción ahorita para poder luego dar la oportunidad a Sonia Perky, que está acá con nosotros, y también a otra profesora. Pero te abrazamos mucho, te queremos y gracias por tus palabras, y vamos a traducir ahora este importante mensaje que nos has dado.
Está bien, Marcia. Un saludo a todas las mujeres, y esperamos unirnos de corazón, de pensamiento, para trabajar esta gran situación que hemos vivido. Gracias, Marcia. Hasta luego.
Gracias a ustedes.
The war footprints leave scars. They leave scars on identity. They mark people's thinking, their understanding of the world, and especially that of women. And that is a violation that transforms our whole conception of reality. We need to face the perpetrators. We need to fight this silence. In the war in Guatemala, the army used violence against women as a weapon. And that is culturally linked to the communities because it has an impact. It has a moral impact in groups, in peoples, in societies. By attacking the female body and its reproductive functions, they're turning it into a battlefield. And they know there will be no punishment because it is related to the privacy of women. And it is one of the greatest tragedies of women of our time. There's also a whole discrimination ideology behind these acts because women who have been raped, who have had their rights violated, feel excluded and marginated in their communities. But rape is not shown. There's not a big interest to talk about rape. We have been through 3 Holocausts in Mayan history in Guatemala. And from the first of them, women have been raped. And there have been lingering effect. The idea of what difference does it really make? What are the consequences? An important one in the second Holocaust where coffee was being cropped. Women had to work the fields and they were raped on the fields. And that had also to do with issues of colonialism. And lastly, during our 36 years of work, there was a whole intellectual organization behind the rape and the sexual violence against women. There was a plan where chains of commands and power were involved. Power had a great and important role in those human rights violations. So I would like to send my regards to all women listening to me from New York. Let's work together to break the silence. Thank you.
Although Virginia is no longer on Skype, but let's give her a round of applause from New York. And also to our translator, to Aida. So we finally come to our distinguished panelists, and we are very, very privileged to have today Sonia Perky on my right, a good friend, a wonderful colleague. She has a master's degree in human rights and originally from Austria, but she lives 13 years in Guatemala. So she's a Guatemalan at heart. And she has dedicated all the last decade to issues related to human rights, particularly to the war in Guatemala. She specializes on forced disappearances, and the forced disappearance is a particular crime that took place in all over Latin America, where the security forces from the state would disappear people from the streets, and people were never seen again. So that Sonia has been working on resolving cases of these crimes of forced disappearances. And also she's a specialist on issues of resolving crimes and participating in this process of crimes against women during the war. And she has also worked for the United Nations in Guatemala. Right now, she is a consultant for the public ministry in Guatemala, dealing with crimes during the war. And at the end of our conversation, we will have the opportunity to try to make some sense of these crimes and these atrocities, and for that we have invited Kyo Lee to my left. She's our awesome colleague, philosopher from the Department of Philosophy here at John Jay, faculty, and from the Women's Studies Certificate Program, the Graduate Center Faculty Fellow, the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics at the Graduate Center, and we are just very, very honored to have them both here. And then they will speak, and then we will have Q&A. So please just bear with us for a few more minutes while we listen to our panelists. Please.
Good evening. The witnesses I've been working with usually say, go back to your country and tell what had happened in our country. So I will do this today. Maybe it's not my country, but one of the desire of survivors of war atrocities in Guatemala usually is that people outside of Guatemala know what had happened there. So we already heard about what had happened in Guatemala, so today I will focus on what had happened with women in Guatemala and how they are breaking the silence. And I would like to share first a testimony presented by a survivor of multiple rape during the Court of Conscience against sexual violence against women in Guatemala in March 2010. I was 20 years old, and I was carrying my third child in my belly, the 5th month of pregnancy. I was washing clothes behind my house when suddenly a group of about 20 soldiers appeared, and they ordered me to prepare them food. My husband left early for work, and I was alone at home. My 2 kids were inside the house. So I went into the house and prepared tortillas for them. In one moment, when soldiers didn't pay attention, I told my oldest son to take the smaller and silently to take the smaller one silently to grandmother's place, and they left through the window. After having their meal, one of the soldiers said, "Let's have fun. You will like this. Guerrilla bitches like always fuck with everyone." All of them went over me, one by one. I don't remember how many exactly. I thought I'll die. I thought this will be the end. I don't remember how many time passed. After they have gone, I stayed lying on the floor. I could not walk. Everything hurt. Blood was running out of my belly. I didn't lose the baby, but all the weeks after, this felt like a big stone inside my body. About 3 months later, I gave birth to a lump of something. My baby was completely deformed and dead. This is only one example how women are targets of sexual violence during armed conflict, when rape, sexual slavery, and other forms of sexual abuse and assault are used as a deliberate strategy of war. And at the same time, it is the most silent part of a history of war. And although it was present everywhere, and almost nobody talks about it, not even in their own families.
You want to leave for Aida? She's going to translate it.
Las mujeres en Guatemala, cuando hago mi investigación, me dicen que vuelva a mi país y cuente lo que les está pasando. Este no es mi país, pero vengo a contarles lo que está pasando, porque es uno de los derechos de las supervivientes, que la gente fuera de Guatemala sepa lo que ocurre. ¿Y qué pasa? Lo que vengo a contarles hoy es qué pasa con las mujeres en Guatemala y cómo éstas rompen el silencio. Les voy a leer un testimonio en marzo de 2010 de una mujer que fue víctima. Brevemente habla de cómo un grupo del ejército llegó a su casa en la que estaba sola con sus hijos pequeños y ella estaba embarazada del tercero. La violaron, consiguió hacer que sus hijos pequeños se marcharan, pero la violaron y aunque no dio a luz, aunque no abortó, unos 3 meses después, dio a luz a un niño deformado y muerto. Lo que quiero contarles hoy es cómo las mujeres son objetos de violencia sexual en conflictos armados. Y sin embargo, aunque se trata de una estrategia deliberada de la guerra, es una parte totalmente silenciada una vez que finaliza la guerra. Está presente en todas partes, pero nadie habla, ni siquiera en las propias familias.
So gender-specific violence was used as a calculated strategic part of the counterinsurgency military campaigns carried out across the country in the 1980s and in lesser degree in the 1990s. But until recently, it had been ignored by the international community, including most press agencies and social justice and human rights organizations. In fact, there is few information of cases of sexual violence in both truth reports, because at the moment that they designed the methodology of these truth reports, they didn't think about to include the sexual violence during the research, but they noticed during the interviews that that sexual violence was a very present and a very common crime against women, and they forgot about that. So they in the research project they included this part, but not from the beginning on. The state of Guatemala, through its different democratic governments since the peace accords, never recognized fully the atrocities committed against civil population, and the state didn't recognize either the reports of the national and international truth commissions. Today, the state still refuses its responsibility of war crimes, genocide, and severe human rights violation committed during the war. It just didn't happen. So they only recognize partially some kind of violation, because they had to do it through the sentences of cases of human rights violation admitted at the Inter-American Court of Human Rights.
I think you can go on.
Yeah. The Army's perception of Mayan communities as natural allies of the Army's perception of Mayan community was that they are natural allies of the guerrilla country. And they demonstrated a very aggressive racist component of extreme cruelty that led to the extermination and mass of defenseless Mayan communities, including children, women, and elderly. And these massacres, as we heard already, and the so-called scorched earth operation were planned and executed by the states, and they resulted in the complete extermination of many Mayan communities. And in this context, the rape of women was part of the war strategy during torture or before being murdered. It was a common practice to destroy one of the most intimate and vulnerable aspects of the individual dignity, because the majority of rape victims were Mayan women. Those who survived the crime still suffer profound trauma as a result of these aggressions, and the communities themselves were deeply offended by this practice because it was a form of violence against the whole community through the bodies of women. The purpose wasn't necessarily pleasure or sexual satisfaction of the aggressor, but it is related to power, control, domination, and humiliation of women through them to the community. The women's body was seen like the property of the enemy to destroy like all other properties. And sexual violence was used as an instrument of punishment, but also as a mechanism of torture to obtain information. The women's body were used to express the domain of the opponents and to demonstrate power of the enemy. Another motive was the destruction of social codes, sexual norms, and the social or community issues. Women are particularly started as they are often regarded both as representing the symbolic honor of the culture and being the genetic gatekeeper to the community. Because in the Mayan worldview, women represent the connection between Mother Earth and human beings. And through maternity, they transmit to the future generation the language and the values of the Mayan worldview and the norms of life and interrelation within other members in the group. I would like to give some examples how members of army proceeded, like their modus operandi. During the most intense period of the massacre, the first targets were the men of the community. So when military came into the community or came closer to the community, the men fled to the mountains because they thought that they won't kill their families. But they were wrong, because when military appeared in the community, they killed all women, children, and elderly. And actually, there are many massacres in Guatemala only of women and children. In other cases, military groups came very early to the communities and started to separate men and women, and they put men into the church and women usually in schools or other buildings, and then they tortured first the men, and after that they killed them, and they killed also the women, but first they raped them, and in very, very many cases they raped them collectively and in front of their family or the community members. Genital mutilation was very common during these proceedings. There are many testimonies about that they cut off their breasts, they mutilated their genitals, and if the women were pregnant, they cut the abdomen and took out the fetus. And there are testimonies which reveal that soldiers grilled this fetus, or they forced the father to eat it. Young girls, like 7 or 8 years old, were raped in front of the eyes of their parents, and especially the youngest didn't survive these rapes. There are other cases where soldiers just appeared in the communities, they raped the women and they left. They didn't kill the people, they just raped the women. Sexual slavery.
Can you give we're going to give a brief summary, just because if not, it will be too long.
La violencia contra las mujeres es una parte estratégica de las campañas militares contra los insurgentes en Guatemala. Ha sido algo ignorado por la comunidad internacional. Incluso el Estado de Guatemala nunca ha reconocido estas atrocidades, salvo en las sentencias de la Corte Interamericana de Derechos Humanos que los obliga a ellos. La percepción del ejército es que las comunidades mayas son aliados naturales de las guerrillas y por tanto hay una voluntad casi de exterminación en masa de estas comunidades indefensas de mayas. A las mujeres se las viola durante la tortura y antes de asesinarlas, y con ello se destruye la dignidad individual y colectiva, se generan traumas profundos, y el objetivo no era el placer o la satisfacción sexual del agresor, sino demostrar el poder, castigar, torturar para obtener información o destruir códigos sociales y el honor de las mujeres y su conexión con las futuras generaciones. Dentro del modus operandi de estos grupos del ejército es que en algunos casos separaban a los hombres y las mujeres y los torturaban y los mataban por separado, las mujeres las violaban en grupo, mutilaban sus genitales, etc.
Also, slavery and sexual slavery was common. The women were forced to live with the soldiers in military bases, do domestic work, and they were raped continuously during the days, weeks, or years. Especially young girls were forced to marry military members. As tells another testimony, they separated men and women. 12 of the women were chosen and they were divided in pairs. Every pair of women had to stay with 5 soldiers. They had to cook for them, wash their clothes, and the soldiers were raping them during 15 days. Hundreds of families who could survive fled into the mountains where they stayed for weeks, months, or years, and they were pursued by the army, and when the soldier found the women, they raped her. So they couldn't escape from this terror for many, many, many years. And so the army destroyed their food resources. Many of them died because of hunger or illness in the mountains. Another testimony which a woman shared to me: I gave birth about 2 hours before the soldiers came in our community. We could flee with my husband and my children. Suddenly I realized that I lost a new baby while I've been running. I had to decide to go back or to save mine and children's life. I felt very weak, I still was bleeding. My husband went back and found the baby. But the baby died anyway, few days after in the mountains. I had no milk because we had nothing to eat. My other children died too. I will give now some examples about the consequences of these atrocities. I could talk now about 3 hours about this, so I want to give some ideas because this is very complex today in the society. Those women who survived these atrocities could not overcome these traumatic experiences and have to face physical, emotional, but also social consequences. Many women became infertile or gave birth to children from unknown fathers, and they are confronted day by day with the product of their violation. But another reality is that many of these women were or are rejected by their community or their husbands because they aren't pure anymore. In a patriarchal system like we have in Guatemala, virginity is very important, and the young girls couldn't found any family, or many of them, many young girls, maybe not all, couldn't found a family because they are not pure, they are not virgins anymore. And those women who were already married were accused by adultery and were rejected by their own husbands, and they had to leave their community. But another reality is also that many of the raped women don't accept sexual relations anymore, so they are rejected by their man or the community also, so they have to leave the community. During a long time of history of war, sexual violence against women wasn't seen like a crime. It was seen like more something that also happened. Today, sexual violence against women, like a strategy of war, is typified as a crime against humanity or part of genocide, as it is like rape, sexual slavery, enforced prostitution, forced pregnancy, enforced sterilization, or any other form of sexual violence. And in the Guatemalan context, the massive sexual violence committed against women can be characterized as an act of genocide. While sexual violence, just jump one piece of time because of time. Do you want to resume? Yeah. While sexual violence was committed in mass against rural indigenous women in urban places or cities, sexual violence was also part of the counterinsurgency strategies, but on a more selective and individual way. Sexual violence was used like a method of torture in military bases, illegal torture centers, jails, private houses, or public buildings. And the women were raped continuously and massively by members of security forces, agents of intelligence, or their collaborators, and by police agents. But also in these cases, sexual mutilation was, or genital mutilation was also common, and they introduced in their vagina different kinds of objects, many kinds sharp objects, or they gave them electroshocks through their breasts or vaginas. This kind of cases of sexual violence against women in urban places have been completely invisible. First, because these are individual cases and it's more difficult that the women talk about that, but the second is that many of these women died or disappeared because it was one strategy of torture in the act of enforced disappearance of people in Guatemala. And as Marcia also mentioned, the forced disappearance of people was one of the war strategy, and we have more than 45,000 disappeared people in Guatemala. And with this method, military and civil intelligence agents destroyed most of the organized groups in cities by using torture to get information out of the victims. It was usual to detain them illegally, torture them, and then disappear them. They threw the bodies into mass graves in cemeteries or into the ocean, or they appeared extremely tortured in public places but without names. Since the peace accords in 1996, many groups of survivors, victims, or social organizations have been working on bringing out the truth about the atrocities and to get justice for the committed crimes and bring to the court those responsible. And I think one of the first important actions were the exhumations of these illegal mass graves, and 50 years later they are still digging out the past from the earth.
Además de la tortura y las violaciones, la esclavitud sexual también era bastante común. Muchas familias tuvieron que huir a las montañas, donde finalmente muchos acababan muriendo de hambre o de enfermedad. Y hemos oído algunos testimonios de personas a las que les ocurrió esto. Las consecuencias de estas atrocidades van desde la humillación y el trauma personal a cuestiones de infertilidad, de dar a luz hijos de sus propios agresores y el rechazo por adúlteras o por impuras de las comunidades o de sus propias familias. Durante mucho tiempo, la violencia sexual contra las mujeres no se consideraba un crimen, era algo que, bueno, también pasaba. Hoy en día está tipificado como delito, como crimen contra la humanidad o como parte del genocidio, todo tipo de violencia sexual. Y hasta ahora estábamos hablando de violencia sexual en áreas rurales, también ocurría en zonas urbanas. como estrategia contra la insurgencia. Era un método de tortura y a las mujeres las violaban de manera continua miembros de las fuerzas de seguridad, agentes de inteligencia, sus colaboradores y agentes de policía. También era común la mutilación sexual, la introducción de objetos punzantes en la vagina o de descargas eléctricas incluso. Pero esto también era algo tremendamente invisible. En primer lugar, porque era duro y difícil para las mujeres contar esta historia, y en segundo lugar y en mayor medida porque muchas de ellas desaparecieron o fallecieron. Como ya ha comentado Marcia antes, las desapariciones eran otra estrategia común de la guerra. Hoy en día en Guatemala hay 45.000 desaparecidos todavía. Desde los acuerdos de paz del 96, muchos grupos de supervivientes y de víctimas y organizaciones sociales están trabajando en sacar a la luz estas atrocidades y en obtener justicia por los crímenes cometidos. Las primeras acciones al respecto fueron la exhumación de las fosas comunes ilegales y que después de 15 años sigue extrayéndose la verdad de la tierra.
I would like to give an example how women organizations are working on clarifying the past, and working with these women in the communities. First, they started to create spaces to talk about they have experienced, but after some years, the women expressed that they wish to bring the responsible to the court. So these and about 5 or 6 women organizations decided to do a court of conscience against sexual violence toward women during intern conflict. And this is like a symbolic trial where women give their testimony and where symbolic judge give the sentence or decide about it. And the organizers of this court asked me to do a research about the case of a disappeared woman in the city, because they realized that most of the information they have is about the situation of rural indigenous women, but there is few information known about what experience women in the city. So I had already experiences in research doing on forced disappearance in the police or the historical police archive of the former national police, which participated in many of the crimes. And so I investigated this case in the police archive, and one of the purpose was to get evidence about the participation of intelligence agents and police agents in the disappearance, but also to determine if she was victim of sexual violence. And I could find evidence about her illegal arrest, and I could identify the responsible agents with their names and the respect chain of command, but I could not find evidence about torture or sexual violence in this archive. But I could find a report of the arrest of a man with the same modus operandi than this woman, and I thought that he could have been with her. And in this police report, the police reported that he escaped. So I could find this man, and he told me that he definitely was detained together with this woman. She was taking care of him because both suffered terrible torture. And he told me that she shared with him that she was raped continuously and that she was tortured with electroshock through her breast and vagina. So I couldn't find official document to demonstrate the participation of this agent in sexual violence, but I could find a witness telling this story. And so I presented this research, like an expert research, together with other experts in this court of conscience. And actually the court of conscience included concluded that sexual violence was part of the military strategy and planned and executed by the army. And they confirmed the state's responsibility of these crimes. So what happened after this court of conscience? This was like a rehearsal or something like this, like a symbolic trial. Well, the family of the disappeared woman, they are still evaluating if they bring this case to the court or not. There are sufficient evidence to bring it to the court. Actually, it was the first time that evidence of this archive was presented publicly, but they have, it's difficult for them because it means for them a re-dramatization, but also fear about repressions. The Mayan women decided to get to the court and sue the responsible about sexual violence, sexual slavery, mutilation, and torture. And 3 weeks ago, they gave the first testimonies on like a proof taken at once at this court, and they were accompanied by psychologists to go through this. This was a very difficult decision because they are still afraid of repressions because many women live together with the perpetrators in the same communities. So, just to close this, or to come to an end, I want to express that the consequences of these atrocities are still present in today's society. It's not part of the past. It's not something what had happened before. Extreme violence against women is part of today's reality. And every year, around 700 women are murdered viciously because of being a woman. And this is called gender-based murdering, or called femicides in Guatemala. And these crimes have similar expressions. Women are raped first, and they don't just kill them, they mutilate them first, they rape them first, and they leave their bodies in public places. So this is happening today, not only against indigenous women, against every women. It can be everyone. So, and this is one of the expressions that the history wasn't clarified or worked on in Guatemala. And so while we can't clarify the crimes, they will repeat every day. So I think I will leave it here.